I'm Lil Debo from Compton. They be can see. I got something for you.
Acacia Town Farm.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we tapping in the streets of Compton, and we're gonna be talking about the ATF Compton Crips versus the Nutty Blocc Compton Crips and other rival hoods like CV70. We're gonna be discussing all cases involving the ATF alliances, which includes the Acacia Blocc Compton Crips, the Farm Dog Compton Crips, and the Spooktown Compton Crips. Now, the Acacia Blocc Compton Crips are a predominantly African-American street gang from the west side of Compton. Named after Acacia Avenue, they formed back in the 1970s between West Alondro Boulevard and Greenleaf Boulevard. Now, directly to the east of them are the Spooktown Crips, and they hood also stretched from Alondro to Artista Boulevard. And also on the opposite side of Acacia Blocc Compton Crips is Farm Dog Compton Crips. But eventually, all three of these hoods will come together and make up ATF, which stands for Acacia Town Farm. Now, the ATF, they mainly beef with the Nutty Blocc Crips, CV70, Santana Block, and many other sets. But on the flip side, they all cool with the neighborhood Compton Crips, Kelly Park Compton Crips, and the Grape Street Crips. Now, as we head into the 90s, the violence in Compton was at an all-time high, and the ATF alliance was deep in this beef. CV70 and the ATF was going back and forth with lots of tit-for-tat shootings, and there was a lot of bloodshed going on. And on June 22nd of 1991, at around 7 p.m., 4 members of CV70, including Delfino Muniz and German Lopez, was parked by a nearby alley, sitting close to Acacia Blocc Compton Crips hood. Inside the car, they had guns, which included a semi-automatic with a banana clip holding 30 rounds. Allegedly, just days before this incident, Acacia Blocc was responsible for taking the life of a fellow CV70 member, so Muniz and German Lopez was looking for some payback. But little did they know, LAPD officers was nearby and had spotted their vehicle near the alley. LAPD officers would roll up on the CV70 members and immediately demand them to step out of the vehicle. CV70 member named Muniz would tell police officers that they had planned on doing a drive-by shooting on Acacia Blocc simply out of revenge for their homeboy's death. But eventually, both Muniz and Lopez will be charged and will be sentenced and convicted on all charges. Now, why the ATF alliance was beefing with CV70, a beef with the Nutty Blocc Compton Crips would also kick off. Now, in the early 90s, the Nutty Blocc Compton Crips was accused of killing an OG member by the name of Big G Ray from Acacia Blocc.
I remember it was summertime. One of my homies got killed. Big G Ray got killed on Caldwell in Wilmington. In the gang world, you always blame where a person got found at, but actually that's still our hood. That's the borderline, because across the street is Nutty Blocc. We blame Nutty Blocc for doing it.
Now, a few years later, in June 1994, 2 CV70 members, Boxer and Bull, will be gunned down by ATF members.
On this particular date, it was in June of 1994, CV70, their name was Boxer and Bull. 11 o'clock in the morning, and they came over to this street right here. They used to have mailboxes right down here. So they pulled up alongside the mailbox because they were going to drop some letters off to the homies in prison, right? They're being followed by some ATF gang members. There was a van, and there was 4 of them in there. Were armed, one with an AK-47 and the other one with a 9mm of some sort. And one of the guys gets out at point-blank range with the assault rifle, empties his clip, while the other guy, he's shooting out of the car at these guys. It was just a bloody mess. Brain matter was on the windshield and parts of the skull was in the street.
Now, at this point in time, the ATF members are in deep beef on both sides with CV70 and the Nutty Blocc Compton Crips. And a known member by the name of Pooh of Acacia Blocc would suffer a very big loss with his older brother by the name of Derek Watkins.
My homies rolled up, told him like, don't be on the corner. You know what happened last night. My brother's exact word. The niggas know where I'm from. I ain't from over here. I'm from Carver Park. My boy gave him a pistol and an extra clip. He drove off. I heard the shots, but I'm looking. I don't see nothing. So when I seen him run, he jumped the gate. Shot, I ran out, and he was shot in the neck.
As the ATF war with CV70 continued, the war with the Nutty Blocc Crips would heat up also. On August 2nd, 1995, a 13-year-old member by the name of Nero Pounds from Spooktown Compton Crips was talking to a friend in a Cadillac. As he was standing there, suddenly a brown car driven by Nutty Blocc Compton Crips would pull up. In the passenger seat was a man by the name of Lamont Shepard. As they approached the Cadillac, Lamont leaned out the passenger window and started shooting. Nero Pound of Spooktown was hit multiple times, and he would die at the scene right in front of his mother. Shepard from Nutty Blocc Crip was ultimately identified and arrested for this murder, but while locked up, he would write letters to Nero Pound's mother named Rose, who saw the shooting and threatened her that if she identified him, that she would be killed. And ultimately, Rose will refuse to testify in this case, and ultimately all charges will be dropped due to lack of evidence. But years later, after being arrested again, Shepard from Nutty Blocc would actually admit to detectives that he was the one that actually killed and murdered Spooktown member Pound back in 1995. And after years had gone by, eventually he will be sentenced to 29 years to life for the murder of the 13-year-old Spooktown member Nero Pound. Now, as I always say in my videos, when it comes to war, it is always casualties, but most of the time, it's the innocent victims who lose their lives. Now, months later, in 1995, all hell would break loose. On Saturday, December 2nd, 1995, ATF members will be holding a meeting after Renika Jones, the girlfriend of Alfred Shallowhorn of Spooktown, was gunned down earlier that day on the 200 block of West Caldwell Street in Spooktown's hood. At around 8 p.m., Shallowhorn and Cortez Elliott and other members of ATF would ride down the 1004 block into White Street through Nutty Blocc's hood in a yellow Cadillac. Elliott would spot Keenan Faulkner and two teenage girls named Angela Southall and Ronice Williams standing in the driveway. Faulkner, Southall, and Williams were all getting ready to go out for a night of skating, when suddenly moments later, armed with an AK and a Tech-9, both Shallowhorn and Elliott of ATF would open fire on the group. All three were hit, but Southall and Williams, the two teenage girls, were fatally wounded and would die at the scene. Faulkner would later die at the hospital from his injuries. Not long after this, Shallowhorn and Elliott would be arrested for this shooting, and both would be convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Now, as the years went on, the war between ATF and Nutty Blocc and CV70 continued on into the 2000s. On June 4th of 2007, Acacia Block Crips subset called Almond Block, which included Jimmy Burton, DeJuan Oliver, and other Crips, who all stood nearby a Greyhound bus station across the street when they spotted a known Nutty Blocc Crip named Keith Hardy. Jimmy Burton would ask a female for her bike to use to go across the street, but she would absolutely refuse. Once she said no, he would go ask his homeboy for a bike, and he would then ride across the street towards Keith Hardy, armed with a revolver in his hand. Hardy of Nutty Blocc saw Jimmy on the bike coming towards him, and they would exchange words. Moments later, Jimmy would pull out the strap and start shooting. As Hardy tried to flee the scene, he was hit multiple times. Multiple witnesses would identify Jimmy Burton as the shooter, and he eventually would be arrested and found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Now, as the years go on January 2012, two Acacia Block Crips named Corey Coleman and Darius Oliver drove down South Dwight Avenue, and Oliver spotted a Nutty Blocc Crip member by the name of Barry Denman, who was parked across the street from Longfellow Elementary School. Denman was there to pick up his little brother, as he always did, at around 3 p.m. The Acacia Block Crips would immediately pull up next to Denman's car. As Coleman hung out the side of the window, he would start shooting into Denman's car. But amazingly, Denman was able to run out the passenger side of the car without being hit by the gunfire. Now, the Acacia Block Crips not being aware, there was a sheriff patrol car parked next to two buses who had spotted the Acacia Block Crips car directly after the shooting and chased them as they drove away in their Lexus. The Block Crips would eventually pull over and give up and surrender to the police officers, and they would be arrested. Both Coleman and Oliver were found guilty and convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. On July 25th, 2013, known ATF member by the name of Brian Sawyer drove down South Northwood Avenue at around 10 a.m. in the Nutty Blocc's hood. Sawyer was looking for payback after being jumped earlier by the McCarter twins from Nutty Blocc. Sawyer, along with other ATF members, drove in two different vehicles, the first vehicle being a silver Audi A4 and the second vehicle, a charcoal Toyota Corolla. They would slowly pull in front of the home of where Keontae and Deontay McCarter twins lived. As they pulled in front of the house, immediately Sawyer would hang out the window and start shooting. Sawyer would let off 20 shots, which tore through the windows and wood of the home. Sadly, The McCarter twins' 84-year-old grandfather, Thomas Dunbar, was asleep in his front bedroom when he was hit 3 times with one fatal shot, hitting him directly in his head, killing him as he slept. Of course, immediately, the ATF members fled the scene. It will be 2 years later, in January of 2015, when Brian Sawyer would be identified and arrested for Dunbar's murder. After witness statements and overwhelming evidence, Sawyer would be found guilty of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to 75 years to life in prison. Now, just months later after this shooting, a well-known ATF member by the name of Jalen Hosley and another well-known ATF member from Acacia Block by the name of Perkins stood on the block when a tan car drove by the hood. Perkins immediately believed it was a man by the name of Lil D from Palmer Block Crip Hood, and this would piss him off. So not long after seeing the vehicle drive by, Hosley from ATF would jump in his Yukon and follow the tan vehicle. Hosley would spot the tan color sedan driving on West Johnson Street. Now the vehicle was driven by a man named Marquise Lawrence. So as Mosley drove past Lawrence, Mosley would lean out the driver window and start shooting at Marquise. Marquise would be hit multiple times by gunfire, causing Marquise to lose control of his car, and he would crash into a nearby railing. EMTs would eventually arrive on the scene, and they would transport Marquise to a nearby hospital where he would be pronounced dead at around 5:37 p.m. It was later revealed that Marquise Lawrence was not a gang member, but was an aspiring firefighter who had enrolled into the fire academy and was working 2 jobs to support his family. And about a year later, April 2016, Jalen Hosley from ATF would be arrested for the burglary in Pasadena. And while in custody, he would be eventually charged with the murder of Marquise Lawrence after being identified by witnesses as the shooter. And ultimately, Jalen Hosley will be found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 35 years to life in prison for the murder of Marquise Lawrence. I want to thank everybody for taking their time out and watch this video, and I'll see y'all next time.